Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the artist of the graphic novella series November at Image Comics, as well as the co-creator of Infinite Loop and Super Freaks. It's Elsa Charretier. Thanks for coming on, Elsa.
Hi. How are you?
I'm doing well. We were talking about this a little bit beforehand, but I wanted to start. I want to check in on you the day after you finished all your shipping for your Kickstarter art book. Like, how did all that go?
It was not easy, as you would expect. We had 900 packages to ship, so that was intense. But there's two of us, so that made it easier, and we're very organized. So it actually went great. I love packaging. I love the idea of the connection between me and the reader. So I love that you get to put as much as care as you want and have 100% control over what you're delivering. So as a person who's very I want to say controlling, but that's maybe not the right word. But I try to do everything as best as I can. And with the Kickstarter, we have this chance of controlling the product from beginning to end. So I loved shipping all the rewards. It was great.
I think the interesting thing about Kickstarters and also like Etsy, where you're now selling your art book and platforms like that, is it really, it's about people personally investing in your work, in what you're crafting. And I think it's really interesting because we were talking beforehand about how you have like a personal touch with this stuff. And I think that stuff really matters. Have you found that type of thing, obviously you haven't done a Kickstarter for a while, but that personal touch makes a difference for you?
Oh, yeah. You mean for me personally, or how you mean readers perceive it?
For you personally.
Oh.
Well, and as readers, I guess.
I think it's a way for me to truly thank the people who decide to trust us. When you back someone on Kickstarter, I feel like you're not just buying a product or pre-ordering a book. You're also investing, and personally, I think as a backer, you're a bit more invested in that person's career, if you want. Mm-hmm. And having, from our perspective, that's great because we truly can be thankful to the people, not only to back the campaign, but for their trust and for wanting to, hop along on this with us. So I try to do as much as I can to show how much we appreciate the people's trust in us.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting thing because, I've said this before. I don't know if I've ever said it on the podcast, but, obviously I'd prefer if all of my Kickstarters that I've backed would be fulfilled. But sometimes it's almost like I'm more backing them to show my support for creators I believe in and creators I really love.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's a component of that for backers. And people will buy the book or just support you, even though maybe they don't have the money to buy the tier that they would want to buy. Mm-hmm. But they'll take a lower pledge just to say, okay, I'm here with you and I want to support you to the best of my ability.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so, we're going to get to your works like the art book and also November here in a little bit, but I want to take an art journey with you, and I feel like this is fitting given the art book and everything. But I want to start at the beginning because you have maybe my favorite comic origin story I've ever heard. So I'll recount the basics, the stuff that you've kind of talked about before, but you started drawing because your boyfriend, Pierre Collinet, had the opportunity to show his comic pitch to Charlie Adlard, the Walking Dead artist, also, multiple time guest on this podcast, but he didn't have any art for the pitch. So he asked you if you'd be interested in drawing those pages. The thing I find really fascinating is that you at that point were not an artist, but an actress/waitress, as you've said.
Yeah.
Like I said, I want to go back to that because I love that origin. So I want to start with the very basic thing. If you can recall, when Pierre asked you that, what was your reaction? Were you like, no, like I'm not an artist, or was it sure, let's fight?
No, I remember pausing for a second because obviously that was a lot. I didn't know how to draw. I hadn't picked up a pencil in years. I used to draw when I was a teenager, but I quit for a few years. No, I remember saying yes pretty easily. I told him, it's gonna be bad because there's no way that I can probably learn how to draw in like a couple of weeks. But for him, it was either that or nothing.
Right.
So that was, I guess, best. And also the fact that we did that together created something in me that, okay, he's asking me, he trusts me, and if I don't do it, he's screwed. So we started that as a team, and it was great. It was a fantastic introduction to becoming a comic book artist.
Yeah. Well, when you're tasked with drawing a pitch in a medium you've never worked in for a role you've never had, I'm really curious, like, what do you start with? Like, I mean, and beyond that, like, do you find, like, obviously you've learned a lot since then, but do you find that having an impetus like that maybe was kind of, I don't know, I mean, it's like incredible kindling for like interest in art. It's like you're going from not drawing to drawing a comic pitch for a very famous comic artist. I mean, so I guess like, what did you start with, and was that a like shockingly impactful start to the beginning to your interest in art?
I remember it being very painful and hard and frustrating because I think I might have convinced myself that I could learn how to draw that quick, and it turns out you can't. So I did a lot of pictures. I took references, which I don't do anymore. But back then I had no knowledge of anatomy, facial anatomy, anything. So I took pictures and I basically tried to draw what I what was in the pictures. But and also fun fact. We didn't know how balloons were made. So when came the time to, okay, I guess we're gonna have to letter that, we were like, how do you do that? So I hand drawn balloons.
Wow.
Sheet of paper, cut them, pasted them on the pages, and scanned them out.
Oh my God.
So obviously that's not how you do it. But that goes to showing you how little we knew about the process.
Mm-hmm. But, I think the interesting thing about that is, and I have no idea how Charlie reacted, but I feel like the fact that you two were finding solutions like that, and the fact that you were really going for it, I don't know, it means something to a certain degree. It's like it shows a passion and ingenuity that like maybe that there's something more in comics for the both of you for certain. But that is a pretty, I mean, I wouldn't know. I mean, if I was, somebody asked me to letter a comic, I'd be like, I don't even know where to start with this. I guess I would Google things.
Yeah, but there's also the fact that you read comics and you have the higher respect for comics. And I didn't read comics back then. So I wasn't feeling too precious about it. I just thought, okay, I guess we have to do this. And right now I would be mortified. I could never do something like that because I have too much respect for the process and how letters work. But also, if you put yourself in my shoes, back then I had quit acting and I had no formal education. I quit school. I was 17. So And I was 25 when we started doing comics, and I was really lost back then. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go back to school because I hated school, and I knew I liked art. Sorry, but and I thought that movies were how I would express myself, but it turns out it wasn't, and I didn't know what to do with my artistic aspirations, if you want. So when this comic thing happened, where it was dropped on my lap, if you want, I took the chance of that. This is either this or going back to not knowing what to do with my life. So I'm gonna give this a go.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't passion at first, because it was really hard, and but it was something to do.
Sure.
And little by little, I started enjoying the process and reading and understanding how much you could do in comics. And that's when the passion came.
Mm-hmm. When you started to learn about what
Yes.
the art form is capable of and everything.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that kept coming up in your interviews with you and in your Kickstarter for your art book is the word beauty, and like it was one of the reasons why you said in your interview with the Comics Journal that you found the whole process initially to be excruciatingly hard because you like beautiful things. You said in that interview that in general I like beautiful things, physical things, and with that extending beyond just art, like that's your house, your clothes, and beyond. So, I think that is an important part to, like, maybe how you visualize the world and maybe how your art comes out. Like, where does that come from for you? And how do you find that manifesting itself in your work and in your art?
I don't know where that comes from. I guess from growing up, my parents loved art.
Mm-hmm.
And generally speaking, we tend to go to museums and just have a nice looking house. Not an expensive house necessarily, but my parents were very thoughtful into what they bought, and I guess I grew up with that, and I still carries it with me today. And when I started, that's what I talk about in the Comics Journal interview, is it was what I was doing I could see was bad comparing to the comics that I was buying. And it was frustrating because I'm very impatient, and I didn't want to allow myself the time to improve. So I could see that what I was producing wasn't beautiful. There was a ton of mistakes, and so for a long time that was very frustrating. And I began, improving. And when I say beauty, that's not to say perfection.
Sure.
Or pretty characters. That's not, because if you take November, the characters aren't pretty. That's not what I mean by beauty. It's more of a cohesion, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Something that is visually pleasing, but there's something that is not pretty can be beautiful, if you know what I mean.
Totally. I mean, look at and I actually I read the book last night again, and I don't even know if he's identified, but the main, I don't know, cop / bad guy in November, like he's not a traditionally beautiful guy. He's like a dude in a suit who's overweight and who's kind of smarmy and is just really full of himself. But the thing is like in the life that you bring to that character, there's beauty. In like the way that like you cartoon his facial expressions and things like that. Is that more in the vein of what you're talking about? Like it's almost like less about like traditional beauty and more about kind of that cohesion and maybe some like verisimilitude to life, like the truth in life, if you will.
Oh, definitely, that's exactly it. That this makes me think of an artist that I love, which is who's Jim Mafford.
Mm-hmm.
if you look at his work, his characters aren't pretty in the traditional sense,
Very
but
angular. Very angular.
yes, but the personality that goes into his art is beautiful. And that's what I mean when I say beauty. There's intent behind it and character in the lines.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was looking at a list of all of your like, art influences, inspirations, and there was like Fleischer Studios, and there's Bruce Timm and J-Bone and Eduardo Riso and like John Allison. I mean, that's a big range. And the thing that really struck me about all those artists is there's real life to their art. Like you look at somebody like John Allison and like Eduardo Riso, and maybe you wouldn't see that comparison naturally, but both of them, their cartooning and like the way that they, bring characters to life. It's a really rare quality that they have. There's a vibrancy there.
Exactly. I think that both, to a certain extent, might be influenced by animation, but it's the life that counts for me.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of ways to translate that. Obviously, John's work is very different from Risso's work, but like you said, they both have this quality of line that is vibrant and characters that are so alive that you can, root for them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care for stiff, perfect stuff. That's really not my thing. I'm looking for, in an artist or in art in general, I'm looking for intent. What is the purpose behind this? And that's something that I struggled for a while, because the influences that you mentioned, the Fleischer Studios and Bruce Timm, and that's what I grew up with. Mm-hmm. And I guess is a more traditional description of beauty. And for a long time, when Jim's work, Jim Mahfoud's work, I'm pretty sure 5 years back I would have thought, oh, this is weird,
Sure.
And it is weird, but I've learned to, my horizons have broadened, mm-hmm. and I understand his stuff now. I didn't back then. So I'm interested in things that are unique and different.
I saw Jim do he came up to University of or Anchorage, Alaska, in where I live, and he did a live art thing where he had this just wall, and they're like, do something with it, and he just brought it to life. And it was like, honestly, one of the most astonishing things. I just sat there for like an hour watching him like put things in random places. And it was funny because if you watched it, like the individual actions, it wouldn't have made any sense. You'd be like, why is he doing this? But then when you see the whole of it, you're just like, this is like, I don't know. I mean, it's something, it's kind of like if you go see like the Statue of David, and you think about the fact at one point, this was a huge piece of marble and somebody saw a form in it. And it's, Jim is obviously not sculpting, but at the same time, the same idea is there. He sees something on this wall or on this comic page that he can bring to life that others don't. Yeah. And I find that to be really fascinating.
Yeah, it's pure organic creativity, and I'm very envious of that quality, which I don't have. I'm not like that, and I admire that in others.
Well, I mean, I not that you need compliments, but I think you're pretty good. I
guess I have different. I'm not saying that I don't have qualities or stuff. It's just that
it's a different strength.
Ability to just create without filter. That I can't.
Sure. Well, speaking of influence, I do think it's really funny. The most common thing that I see you compared, or the most common artist I see you compared to, is Darwin Cook. And I I guess because of that, I always expected him to be a major influence. But I was reading an interview with you, and you hadn't even read anything by him by the time you'd started drawing, which I find, maybe that speaks to the roots of art. Like, it's like you and Darwin probably have similar interests in like the origins and everything like that, and where you came from visually. But I don't know. I mean, I find the whole idea of roots to be really interesting. Like, there's this one artist that's come on the podcast several times, Sanford Green, who's tremendous. And
Oh, I love his work.
he's so good. But maybe this wouldn't surprise you, but one of his strongest influences is Norman Rockwell.
Oh, I
And
can see.
you can see that.
Yeah, the naturalistic aspect of it.
Well, and I think that's the thing is like, I think sometimes people take influences and inspirations for art very literally. And I guess for you, it seems like maybe your influences are less direct and it's more about feel.
Um, yes, and although I wasn't aware of Darwin Cook's work at the beginning of my career, when people mentioned it, oh, this makes me think of Darwin's work. So I got into his work and I read New Frontier and I fell in love with it because it's very close to my original influences, if you will. So after I've discovered his work, I studied it. So there is part of my work today that spurs from learning him and his work. So I didn't know him back then, but I guess I channeled after that, after discovering his work, I channeled what I love about his work into mine. No, because a lot of time people tell me, "Oh, aren't you? Does it bother you when people compare your work to Darwin Cook's work?" And I'm like, "Why would it? I mean, it's a legend. I take it as an honor that people see similarities between our works."
Mm-hmm. Well, I know you're a fan of J-Bone too, and J-Bone is like, I think J-Bone is super underrated because he's, I think, mostly known as Darwin's inker, but man, his cartooning has so much life to it. He did this one miniseries, I think it was called The Saviors, and his art in that was just incredible. It was like every character was like vibrating off the page. I just think it's amazing.
He has this ability, and you can see that on his Instagram. He does a lot of sketching of, with people. So what's the word? I can find live sketching, and he has this incredible ability to translate anything he sees into shapes. That's it. When he posts his art and the picture that he drew from. I was like, how did he figure that shape arrangement? And it's just incredible. It's an incredible ability to synthesize and simplify the things that he sees.
Yeah. I remember talking to an artist about how it's an artist that's known. It's Daniel Warren Johnson, and he's very, he's incredible. But the funny thing is like we did an interview at Emerald City Comic Con last year where he was talking about how he was looking to try to reduce the lines in his work, and like because for two things: one, I mean, he draws a lot of lines, and two, it's kind of like if he can find a way to streamline what he does, it both saves himself like time in his body, but also it's like, if you can accomplish the same with less, I think that can be really impactful. And sometimes when you see somebody like J-Bone or like, or Darwin and like what they can accomplish with just like some simple lines and less of them, it really like there's something very striking about it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's a tough thing to do that to your own art because you lack the distance. And obviously, it's a process that takes a long time, I think. But I like things that are not simple, with lots of lines. So there's that. But I would be very interested to see what Daniel's works would look like with less lines.
Sure. And now, a quick word from our sponsor. I want to take a quick second to give a shout out to my friends at TKO Studios. TKO is a new comics publisher doing things a little differently, with each of their titles being binge released in trade paperback and 6-issue collector's box sets at the same time. Their second wave of comics dropped recently, including one of my comics of the year in Jeff Lemire and Gabriel Hernandez Walta's Sentient, Roxanne Gay and Ming Doyle's The Banks, and more, as well as gems from their first wave, like Garth Ennis and Steve Epting's remarkable war story, Sarah. Each is available now at tkopresents.com in trade, single issue box sets, and digital release. Want to check these comics out before you order? Well, I have great news for you. If you visit tkopresents.com, you can read the first issues of each title for free right now. If you like what you read and you're a retailer, reach out directly to them at sales@tkopresents.com or go to tkopresents.com/vendors to order. TKO offers a 50% order discount as well as free shipping in the United States, a deal that's pretty hard to beat. Just a reader? That's cool too. You can order whichever comics you like directly off their site as well. Visit tkopresents.com to learn more today. And now, back to the show. One thing I'm always curious about people who come without a comics background or like really even like art. The thing is I think a lot of times when people come into comics, it's because they've always wanted to make comics. And so they have all these very rigid ideas in their brain about the way that they should approach stuff. Do you feel that coming into somebody without that, with a different path, made you maybe a little bit less beholden to traditional ideas and everything? And do you think that helped you if that's true?
I guess yes. Obviously, my experience is different because I didn't grow up reading American comics. So of course how I got into it is by essence different than how someone who's always dreamed of working in comics has. I remember at the beginning being very hard to, when I had commissions to do or pinups. Mm-hmm. People would tell me that it doesn't look like a superhero pinup. Because there is this, I had to learn, there's codes of how Superman stands, with the akimbo position and the heroic look. I had never read that, so I wasn't familiar with it. So some of it I had to learn, and it was just essential that I learn because when you do superhero, you can be different, but to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. You still have to convey the basics of the genre. But if I look at how it's made on my career, I guess it makes me more free because I don't have this childhood dream to fulfill, to work on certain properties. So that makes me more free. Does that make sense?
Totally. I mean, it's if you grow up your entire life wanting to draw Spider-Man and then you never draw Spider-Man, it's going to be kind of unfulfilling. But for you, it's like you're all new to this. And so you just want to make great art with people that you respect or with yourself, and that seems like literally anything is an option for you at that point.
Definitely. And also that makes me less how can I say this, more I feel stronger in my decision-making process, because if something is offered to me and it's exposure, maybe it's a character that anyone else would have wanted to draw, and I don't feel the conditions work for me, I can just say no, because I don't have this internal pressure of saying, oh, this character you have to draw, maybe it's your one shot. If I don't want to do it, I just do something else, without feeling that I missed an opportunity to a dream that I had. My only dream is to do art.
Yeah.
So it can be anywhere.
I love that. Well, I want to. We're going to jump into November here in a second, but I did want to. I have a good transition because I find your career to be absolutely wild so far. Because you started drawing because of a pitch that Charlie Adler was going to look at. You did a graphic novel with George R. R. Martin because he found your art on the internet and loved it. And you were hired for a variety of Star Wars gigs, despite, before being asked for samples, not having actually seen any Star Wars movies, which is like absolutely incredible. Obviously, this is not me. You're obviously hugely talented and deserving, but when I look through these moments, it's like the there's like this fortuitousness to it. There's like a fatefulness to it that is really incredible. It's like almost you were required to draw and you didn't realize it, and you kept being given these opportunities because the world needed you to draw. Did you ever feel like, how does this keep happening to me when all these things were happening?
The George Martin, I had no control over it whatsoever. So it did feel a bit like, yeah, that's random, but maybe not so random. I don't know. So that I had no control over. I don't know how it happened and why, and how it just saved us, financially. We were about to be broke, but like next month broke, and this thing falls upon me, and so yeah, that was very lucky. The other stuff that happened after that, I feel I provoked the chances that were given to me.
Sure.
Which is not to say that I am thankful for a lot of people that I met who gave me a chance, but I went and talked to them in the first place.
Yeah.
One thing also that I feel might have helped me a lot of not knowing comics at all, not knowing who was famous in comics, because at my first Comic-Con I just went ahead and talked to anyone. And it turns out that I spoke to J. Scott Campbell at the first New York Comic-Con, like, oh hey, hi, I'm Elsa, this is my book, and everyone told me, you just talked to him? Weren't you nervous? I'm like, no, who is he? I don't know him. So, maybe had I known these people were so, famous and to be treated with a lot of respect. I mean, I was respectful, but it served me not knowing that maybe I couldn't go talk to them.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of like what you're saying with the, you didn't have that desire to draw Spider-Man or to draw Batman or something like that. So it makes you free. And I think in the same way, it's like walking around a con. It's like if you go up to, I don't know, let's say George Perez or somebody like that. And, you aren't going to have that decades of buildup in your brain of like, what would I say if I met George Perez? And you're just like, hey, what's up, J. Scott Campbell? Here's my art. And he was probably like, cool, let's talk. And I imagine, sometimes, like one thing I always tell people who want to do podcasts or interviews and things like that is it's important to remember that, comic creators are just people. And I'm sure that I'm sure J. Scott Campbell was enthused about a person who was just treating him like an ordinary artist.
Yeah, he was very nice, which is why I didn't understand at the time that he was so famous. He was very sweet. So yeah, but today, now that I have a few years experience and that I know what's current and I am fans of other artists, that makes it harder to go ahead and talk to them now. So I'm glad I didn't back then.
Yeah. I do think it's funny too. You were talking about a little earlier about how not having that history with characters or properties or whatever allowed you to say no or yes to projects that you wouldn't have otherwise. And it's interesting because like Star Wars, like, I think your Forces of Destiny stuff is beautiful. And I like especially there's that the Leia cover that's on Hoth, or I would presume it's on Hoth. She's riding a Tauntaun. But anyways, and like that's like your stuff is incredible, but I feel like an artist who may have, I would say the majority of artists probably have some history of Star Wars, but without going in, obviously you watched everything before you start working on it, but without having that history, like maybe there's some freedom there too. You didn't feel like that pressure that would come with like, oh my God, I'm finally drawing Star Wars. This is like my dream. It's like, it makes you more free when you're actually bringing it to life.
Oh, most definitely. Pierrick, who's my partner and writing partner, and he was a fan of Star Wars. And so when we got a chance to do the Forces of Destiny, the Leia issue, he was petrified. Like, oh my God, I'm writing Leia, can you imagine? And it's like, nope. and then obviously after that, I watched the movies and I loved it. And I didn't feel pressure, but I did feel like I had to be up to the task. and to what Leia represents for people,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe less fear going into it
Yeah.
than. So I guess that was helpful as well.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just I'm just going into things not knowing anything. I was like, I'm not scared because I don't know anything about this. But yeah, that's how it's been so far.
Sure.
And I guess that can be a bit infuriating for people who are fans of properties on which I was lucky enough to work on.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of respect for all those properties. I just didn't grow up with them. So my views on it are a bit different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I had this young artist on my podcast named Brenna Thumler who did this just absolutely wonderful graphic novel called Sheets. And it is like, her art is brilliant. And the funny thing is like she never wanted to draw comics. Like she wanted to draw, but she, didn't want to draw comics, and she just kept getting pulled in. And one of the things I thought was really interesting about her is it seemed like when she was drawing, it was almost like she didn't have the same ideas in her head. And so when she would draw something and somebody might be like, oh, why did you draw it like that? That's not how you draw comics. She's like, that's how I draw comics. And I always found that to be really fascinating, because it's like you almost have like this indoctrination is a very intense word, but it's kind of like that. It's like you have this idea of the way things need to be because you've watched Star Wars, or you've made comics, or you've read comics, or this or that. And I don't know. I like the idea that some people come in a little bit more free from that, because it results in very interesting stuff.
And that's how medium evolved. And I mean, if you look at comics, it has evolved.
Yeah.
So you can't deny that some people with different influences have already changed the medium. And I guess it's the only way that comics can survive, because the landscape is changing, and you don't want to be cannibalizing yourself. You want to be open to the world and evolve with the world. And that's story-wise and art-wise. So I think that's good that editors are bringing people that don't know anything about comics. Although knowing sequential work is important.
Yes.
When you draw comics, but maybe people that come from the graphic novels, they know how to draw sequentials. They have maybe more different creative freedom that people in comics do. So when you put that together in a bag, interesting things can result from it.
Yeah. Well, so another example of the fatefulness of your life, I think it's really fascinating. When I was reading interviews, I came across an interview in 2015 where somebody asked you like, oh, whose writing do you really like? And you're like, I love Matt Fraction's stuff. He is incredible. And now you're doing a graphic novella series, November, with him. So that happened too. The first volume is out. The second volume is coming out soon. I am really curious. It's such a fascinating project. I love the idea that there's like a series of graphic novellas rather than like, a series of issues that turn into a graphic novel and et cetera. It's a great project, but I'm curious, how did that come together? How did you and Matt pair up to make this book?
You mean before we started the project, how we came to
Yeah. Like, what was the origin? Like, I mean, maybe starting with like, how did Matt and you first get together to do a project, and then how did November spawn from that?
Okay. So again, I went ahead and talked to him. No, I'm oversimplifying this, but we met at Paris Comic Con a few years back, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and he was with Kelly Sue, his wife and fantastic writer, and so we spent a weekend together at the Paris show, and then we visited them at their house a couple of times, and during that second time, I was like, okay, I'm gonna just ask him, because I love his work, and why wouldn't I just ask? And maybe and probably he'll say no, but I'll know, And so I just said, would you like to do a book together? And it was like, yep, let's do it. So and also I also knew that Matt is very sweet and he wouldn't destroy me. You know, he wouldn't say like, what are you? I mean, I'm super famous. No one knows you. I'm not going to do a book with you. He would never say something like that. So I knew that even if he would say no, he would be very kind. But he said yes. So that was, I mean, I wasn't expecting it, honestly. So, and we started, okay, what should we do? And we both agreed on doing something that we had never done before. Completely opposite to what we had done so far. He needed a change of hair. I did too. And so he had an idea, you know, about a gun, because the origin story, he might have told you in his podcast. He found a gun in his yard after hijacking very, you know, not nice story. He found a gun in his yard 10 years ago, I think. And he had this idea in the back of his mind. And when I asked him, he said, that's the book that we should do. And so doing something that we had never done before also inspired the format that you talked about, the 3 graphic novellas, which is going to be 4, actually. We're adding 1. So that's, like you said, a bit unusual. But why is it unusual?
Right.
You know? I mean, it just makes sense. You do a book and it's too big to be a single book, so you do a series. I mean, it seems pretty logic to me. So that's how. And then we started working on it, and it took a while to, you know, put together. I had stuff to finish. He had stuff to finish. But we've been working on this for over a year now, and I've, you know, been loving it. It's been an incredible process. Matt's writing on this book is incredible, very different from his other stuff, which goes to show how prolific and how you know, how his writing can adapt to very different genres. It's been great, honestly. And we're working with Matt Hollingsworth, who's coloring it, and Kurt and Kenny, who's hand lettering it. And I mean, the whole team, I feel very, very lucky to be working with such incredibly talented people.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of a dream team of creators. Like when you have a cartoonist who's actually hand lettering it, and then isn't Ryan Hughes designing it too?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't mention it.
No. I mean, it's just like, you know, as a person who really appreciates well put together books, I mean, I imagine getting a book designed by Ryan Hughes is a pretty big thrill for you too.
Yeah. He had done, Matt had worked with him before, and Ryan had done our logo for the Super Freaks books. So I wanted to work with him again, and Matt did too, so that was perfect. And you know, that book does not make sense from an economic standpoint. It's very expensive. It's beautiful, but it's very expensive to make. But I mean, that's fine. I don't care. Matt and I wanted to put together a beautiful object, the highest quality possible. We did that, and we're very proud of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and related to you know, you were talking about like the graphic novellas, like the format and everything like that. Like, why doesn't that make sense for comics? Another thing about it too is the way that you and Matt tell the story. It's, you know, it has a series of stories that are connected, but they're all kind of spinning out of specific moments. They're all spinning out of specific elements. And it's kind of like, in some ways, it's like almost like Pulp Fiction or something like that, where it's a nonlinear story where everything is connected, but nothing is like at least on the surface, like so connected to the point where you don't understand them individually. And I think that's really rare in comics. Like I mean, it's, or at least in ones that are typically marketed at the direct market. Like normally narratives are a little bit more straightforward. And I think it's really exciting seeing how the two of you are working with this more non-linear structure for, for a graphic novella series like this.
I think there are a number of reasons why so few writers work that way and do stories that way. In the direct market, if you don't grab the attention of the reader in issue 1, they drop your title. So you don't have the luxury of time in the direct market. And that's why so many first issues have that exact, same structure, then the cliffhanger at the end. And that's why so many issues 1, look similar. That's, I think, a constraint of the market. And the fact that there are so many titles out and a lot of good titles that you don't want to take the risk of losing readers. So there's that. And also, we took our time. Matt took his time to write it. And a lot of the direct market is very fast. We got to put this book out and fast. And so some things take time. You have to let them brew in your mind, and that's not always possible in the direct market.
Yeah.
Or at least with the floppies, monthly floppies.
Mm-hmm. When I had Matt on, I actually had him on to talk about Solid State, the book that he did with I think one of Albert Montes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fantastic. I love that graphic novel, and the funny thing is like this. I can't believe I'm actually bringing this back up because I think even Matt thought I was weird for saying it, but I was just like, I'm a big fan of production value, like books that are really well crafted, and like Solid State had really good quality paper. It It smelled really nice. It smelled, and like that was this part that I thought Matt was weirded out by. But it's like, the books that are well put together, there's just like something tactile and something different about them that you can't even explain. And that's one thing I really appreciate about November too, is just that you have this incredible comic, but it's framed in this package that just amplifies everything about it.
Well, that makes a difference. That was our goal, so
good.
Thank you.
Well, I did want to ask about how you and Matt work together, because one thing that I read was that when you were first working on the first volume, you were worried about the 12-panel grid and like the specifics for Matt's scripts and how that might be restrictive. But, to quote you, you found that the constraints of having the panel written down on the script forced you to be creative in a different way. And that's one thing I've heard from a fair amount of artists. I've heard that constraints can actually be weirdly stimulating from a creative standpoint.
Definitely.
What did you discover during that process?
I discovered that I can do better. When some of the work is already done, the breaking out breaking of the panels and when that part is done, I don't have to figure out what size for which panel. That gives me time to work on other stuff, and try some new things that maybe I wouldn't have if that part of the job hadn't been done. So yes, that proved me that there's a lot to improve on and experiment with. I don't know if, I guess that's true for a lot of artists, but we tend to have, your panel, you go to panels, and him pointing in the script that this should be done that way or that way kind of disrupted that. Maybe I would have done a panel that I was more comfortable with, or that would have been easier at the layout process. I couldn't do it because in the script it said that it had to be this or that way. So I had to come up with new ways of telling the story. Mm-hmm. So that made me more creative.
Yeah. I think the cool thing about that too is like that's the type of thing that you probably carry forward in your art. And so it's like once you're done with November, maybe when you're working on your next project, you'll be thinking about the panels a little bit differently because of what you went through on November.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Well, I did want to ask. So you're working with Matt Hollingsworth, which you mentioned, and I know that you don't always color yourself, but it seems like you like to color yourself, near as I can tell. Is it strange being colored by other people and like taking steps out of your process? Like, does it change your process when you're drawing a book at all?
I haven't colored a book that I drew in a very, very long time.
Oh, okay.
Not Infinite Loop, because I'm not very good at it. I haven't put the time to learn.
Sure.
So I'm not good enough, and a lot of colorists in comics are great. And so if I can have someone who is gonna take my work and make it 100 times better, yeah, go for it. I don't feel like I don't. I'm happy to share the ownership of the work with the colorist.
Sure. Well, I did want to talk about your art book before we go. And you kickstarted your art book, and to quote the Kickstarter, it's a collection of some of your best pieces commissioned by collectors, comic book covers, and detailed process of your storytelling work from November and Star Wars, Dr. Aphra. You did it because you hurt your hand, but also you wanted to learn InDesign and how to properly make a book. I find that whole thing to be, I love it. I think it's such a great idea. How was that experience for you? Did you find that to be a very creatively rewarding experience to go back through your work and kind of assess it yourself?
Part of putting together a book is you have to learn to accept that even though you find your pieces and your work not always, perfect or not always good, some people, you find out, like it anyway. So it's kind of hard to select pieces when I see that I could have done this or this better, but now it exists that way. So I think it's, for the soul, it's nice because you get to realize, okay, this is not perfect, but people seem to like it anyway. So that part was interesting, a bit challenging at first to select pieces, but the learning a new skill, the mock-up, and that was great. I always felt a bit that I couldn't do everything because I didn't know how to do mock-ups. And I was relying too much on other people to do that for me. And as an artist, I strive, as an entrepreneur, I strive to be as independent as possible. So I really, really wanted to do that, to make sure that if something happened and somehow I didn't have work anymore, or publishers won't hire me, or I could still do books because now I know how.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was one of the motivations behind this.
Sure. It's funny, actually, at the same time while you were doing that, my wife and I took on a project. So I have a site on top of my podcast, and the site's called Sketched, and I wanted to put together a print annual of it because I love books, and I think that putting together something collecting your work is always a very interesting exercise. And so during that process, my wife did the bulk of it, but I had to learn InDesign because of it as well. And it was really interesting trying to put together something that's collecting your work, and in the process, it almost makes you, reassess a little bit. Like you were talking about, you see if somebody else has value in that work, then there's value there. And I don't know, I found the whole process to be really interesting, and I imagine it was quite illuminating for you. So do you feel like when you had to like kind of look back on that stuff and when you were putting together the notes, the detailed process on like November and Star Wars Dr. Aphra, did you find that you maybe learned a little? I mean, I know it's kind of weird that maybe you could learn about yourself while you're looking over something you've already done, but did like having a little critical distance from it, did that help you at all?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It Some of the things that I put into the art book is about the process and why this panel was done that way. I wasn't necessarily aware of it when I drew them. I had to, in order to write the captions and the copy of the book, I had to deconstruct that
Wow.
and try to understand why I took that decision that was probably, organic and driven by instinct. I try as much as possible not to, overthink and try to just listen to my gut. But in order to do that book, I had to go back and understand and try to explain it to people how I did it and that. And it's interesting to see how your brain learns without and just regurgitate. No, what's the word? Uses that without you being aware that you ever learned it. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it seems to me that like I don't know. I mean, this is just something I've picked up on when I've been researching for this. It seems like you're a very naturally curious person. It seems like if there's something you don't know how to do, you want to find out how to do it. And I think that is a very important characteristic in an artist because there's always things you could learn from. Like you mentioned photo reference earlier. And, a photo reference is kind of like a weird, sticky subject for a lot of artists because it's like you can lean too far into photo reference, but there's a lot of value to it. And it's like learning how to appropriately use it and to help, escalate and elevate your art, I think is a really powerful tool. I'm not speaking strictly to photo reference, but do you find that it's important for you to always continue to try to learn more about your craft and about art and how you can do these things better going forward?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm very still early in my career, and one thing that kind of terrifies me is thinking that what I'm doing right now, I'm doing in 25 years. You know, I love art, I love comics, but I also know that I want to do different things and evolve and try new things. And in order to try new things, you have to learn some new tricks along the way. So a lot of the time, the things that I decide to learn, there's a purpose, behind it. How can I use that skill? I used to be very, too curious and want to learn, anything. And I mean, that's too time consuming, and ultimately it doesn't add up to just anything else. But you've learned something. But now I'm a bit more focused and try to learn things that I will be able to use and to further my career, and venture into new territories.
So when you say like 25 years down the line and you're talking about, doing the same thing, do you mean in how you approach art, or do you mean even like the mediums you work in, the way that you would approach those, et cetera, et cetera? Is it more all encompassing than just strictly like, this is how I would draw a panel?
Oh no, I don't. Yeah, I don't necessarily mean the art, although I hope that in 25 years it'll be different,
Sure.
better, and just different because I'll be a different person, so my art will be different. But I also mean, the what I do every day. I like what I do right now. I also know that I might want something different in a couple of years, which doesn't mean that I'll stop drawing comics. Maybe it will be in a different form, But I do know that I want to, at least for now, I want to say distant future, but in the next few years, I know I want to keep drawing. That's what I love. But drawing and the ability to be able to do that allows you to do different things.
Yeah.
Venture into new things.
Yeah. Well, the last question I have for you is kind of related to that, because in an interview about the art book, you said you wanted to get back to a more DIY approach to publishing. And I think that's, I mean, honestly, like, of everything we've talked about, that fits you. That fits, the vision of Elsa that I've created in my head over this past hour. But what is the appeal of that to you? Like, why would you like to get back more in that direction where you kind of are doing your own thing?
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, so you said in that interview, or at least what I read, is that you want to get back to a more DIY approach to publishing. And
oh, yes. Okay,
yeah. So I guess, what's the appeal of that to you?
Try new things, and also important. I put a lot of value in owning my stuff. So obviously, Kickstarters and stuff like that allow you to retain the rights of your character. And I've always had a lot of difficulty accepting that you could create something and then it's not yours. Yeah, I mean, it's okay when all the parties go into it and are okay with it. But that's always something I've had a lot of difficulty with. I'm not, if I do something and I'm gonna put my soul into it, I want this to remain mine and my co-creators, of course.
Yeah.
So that's how the DIY comes into play.
Yeah, I mean that's such a important topic throughout comic book history, is like, the art and the artist and the ownership of that, and how those three things kind of commingle and everything like that. So no, I totally get that, because it seems like, because you're not so beholden to specific properties and everything like that, it also seems like it naturally leans into what you would be interested in and what the types of stories you would want to tell. It's like, if you don't have that Spider-Man story in you necessarily, but you do have stories in you, there's no reason why you shouldn't own it at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that I know I want to put my energy into. Yeah.
Well, that is, I'm looking forward to what you do with that. I mean, you're already doing that with November, but Elsa, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about November, your art book, and everything else.
Thank you. I appreciate your questions and your interest in what I do.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer-artist Elsa Charretier. You can find her work in November Volume 2 at Image Comics in May. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all the site's content and its members-only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, followed on Twitter at @SketchComic, or following me at @SlicedFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Stefan Hall, Dan Lee, Cameron Schrader, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Mara, Christian Sheldon, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grombeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Ta, Transmitter Down, Harry Sayer, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Litwin Studios, Akil Wilson, Nathan House, Alex Demetriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Liana Kingus, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Gibbs, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Rymont, Connor Farner, Vita Yalit, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil, Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pinello, Kent Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Assey, Adam Bogart, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Brawley, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Schipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiBonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.